We're going to bring back our, well, not even going to bring back. It's going to be a new series based on female physique. So we're going to call it probably Essentials of Female Physique Development or something along those lines. And we're going to get Scott to run through that because, Scott, you have worked with a lot of women. You get really great results. And what I really appreciate about your work, you focus on keeping them healthy. So do you want to open up about like, what do you do? What is your focus? Do you focus on getting women just healthy, just weight loss, muscle strength, maybe getting them ready for shows? What the hell can people expect if they were to reach out to you? And what do you see as the most common denominator in sense of what women actually want when they reach out to somebody who's health-oriented coach? Is it just aesthetics? Is it maybe fixing their hormones? Is it a little bit of both? Or, you know, like very popular now is dealing with eating disorders and whatnot. That's psychology, whatnot. So what do you see is the most common that people come and ask you to work with you for? And what do you see that actually needs to be worked on?
I've been working with females now for well over 2 decades. And I would say it's a pretty broad spectrum in terms of their goals. I get a lot of just gen pop females that want to get in a different, shape, usually a little leaner. I get some female athletes, and then I get as far as the extreme aesthetics of bodybuilding, usually more of the bikini and figure categories. I had a bikini girl win the overall last weekend. I had a figure girl turn pro a few months ago, and they're the extreme end of the aesthetics. The goal always seems, aside from the outliers where they're in the extreme sports side of things, the goal always seems to be the same, but it's described quite differently. They always want to be leaner. How they word it to me changes. They say they want to get toned or they want to weigh a certain amount, but really what it comes down to is they always just want to lose a little bit of body fat, change the shape of their physique, probably to look good in their mind, which will help them feel good in their mind. So it's pretty much the same goal described relatively differently. And what I usually see them doing is approaching it in the most aggressive manner and causing usually hormonal disruptions, physiological problems, just because of the aggressiveness of usually the diet or sometimes the drug use as well.
So what really, so I got a few questions. So they're wanting to get leaner, or do they want to get extremely lean? Is there sometimes the conversations that you have and you're like, you know what, you already look great, we need to push you opposite way around? Because I've had those conversations. I'm like, girl, there is nothing to do to get you leaner. We actually need to build some muscle first. And alongside of that, what inspired you to do this? Because there is a hell of a lot you need to know to work with women. I think way more than with men.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I've had both scenarios. I've had some people that they just have this almost this body dysmorphia. They think they need to be getting leaner, and they don't. They absolutely don't. And getting leaner would probably cause them more physiological problems. I've had some where the goal should be the accrual of more lean contractile tissue, like more muscle. Almost all of my clients in the 20 plus years, there's been more muscle needed, in my opinion. Whether or not they thought that or not, it ended up being that they agreed, because females need muscle. It's very important. It helps them tremendously, especially in long-term longevity, just their overall health. I think it's a shame that more women aren't chasing more strength training instead of doing cardio all the time. They need to put on some muscle. So I would say that talk has happened. And what sort of pushed me into this was almost by default. When I first started coaching, I was coaching sport specific performance athletes mostly, and it was a lot of combat stuff. And then it led into a few aesthetic people coming in that I was coaching for free just to make sure that I, could grasp what was going on. And probably because of I don't know, but I assume probably because of my stature, like I'm not a bodybuilder, nor have I ever aspired to be one. So I'm not a big 250-pound or 121 kilo, Latvian. So bodybuilders aren't asking me to coach them. So I was getting a lot of those board short guys, which then also led to a lot of bikini girls. I just found working with them much more challenging and interesting. And it just made me sort of, go down the rabbit hole because their physiology is much more complicated. And I find it incredibly fascinating. And they're usually better clients. They adhere to instructions better. They do a better job of being meticulous with the details, and they just got better results overall. And then so it just led me to kind of continue to research and learn. And before you know it, it's been 20 plus years. And now I've got a teenage daughter that's doing very well competitively in volleyball. And so I want to make sure that she's getting, performance increase, performance abilities and not causing any type of potential hormonal disruptions as she's in the developmental years. So there's been a lot of outside and now inside forces kind of keeping me motivated to stay with the research, stay sharp with what's going on, and understand it better.
What do you think was one thing, well, maybe multiple things, if you were to start again that you wish you learned earlier? Was it maybe psychology? Was it maybe reading blood tests? Was it understanding differences in physiology? What do you think was the one thing that you started to look into and it kind of clicked? Oh, this was a missing piece for me to get quicker to the results thereafter. So let's say somebody wants to do it on their own, because a lot of times when I was working in a gym, I used to work on a gym floor, people would go in and say, I'm going to do some work on my own, and then I'm going to come find you when I get stuck, which is very backward thinking. It's like people don't buy a car, then crash it, and then go to driver instructor, teach me how to drive it. But
Right.
for the gym force, for God knows what reason, people think it's a great idea to join the gym, mess their bodies up, establish really bad habits, and then go and find somebody to teach them how to do things correctly. So if you were to give somebody advice who's just starting out, what would you tell them? Hey, you know what? Maybe read about this first. Like Dorian Yates famously wrote in his books that before he started training for his bodybuilding journey, he read everything he could put his hands on about nutrition, training, recovery, so on and so forth. So he studied bodybuilding before he actually started to do that. So if you were to give advice to somebody who's just starting out to get healthier, what would you tell them? Hey, read about this first, or maybe find somebody who understands these things. What would be that one thing to start with?
To a female audience, I would say that they really want to understand their endogenous hormones and their menstrual cycle. I shouldn't know more about female menstrual cycles than a female, and yet seemingly I almost always do. And only because from my experience, the majority of my female clientele, their goal is an aesthetic goal, usually. The performance athletes are separate, but bikini, bodybuilding, and gen pop, it's always an aesthetic goal. And an aesthetic goal is going to come down to body composition. Body composition is going to come down to how much lean muscle do you have, how much body fat do you have. And females, for whatever reason, are notoriously just using their scale weight to determine what's going on. And they're not considering the impact that the hormone fluctuations that happen cyclically every month, in theory, have in terms of impact on that scale weight. And so what I have seen, literally hundreds and hundreds of times, is females adjusting their caloric intake based on scale weight prematurely, because they think they need to lose more calories to lose more weight when they're really measuring overall mass and not the difference between fat mass and fat-free mass. And so what happens is they cause themselves a caloric intake that's usually, not always, but usually not sufficient enough to maintain regular hormonal production. And then you get into, amenorrhea or menstrual irregularities. And then from there, the cascading problems begin. And they're so rooted deep now that trying to diagnose what went wrong takes a lot of time. And usually you don't have people with a lot of patience that are willing to put in the time to properly diagnose what's going on. They're looking for band-aid solutions or quick fixes, and there isn't any.
This brings me to asking you, like, is there even a ability to be, let's say, stage ready and still be healthy?
Depends on what you mean by healthy. Can you be stage ready all year round without drugs? No, absolutely not. So can you take drugs to maintain health? Well, no drug is healthy, but sometimes a drug is healthier than, the alternative. But to try and stay stage lean all year round is a very unrealistic, unsustainable goal, unless you're putting your body through a lot of additional potential problems like drug use. The people that stay relatively stage lean year round are using PEDs of some sort, usually more than just one, and they're advertising something that's just not really true. It's not sustainable without drugs. And even if you are sustaining with drugs, you have to be careful with what health markets you're watching, because overall it can be taxing the system in different ways. But there's other people that psychologically they're a mess if they're not a certain level of leanness, which is a whole new other, sort of health conversation. But it kind of depends then.
I find I have this battle with not just women, but with guys as well, that they want to stay certain level all year round. And I'm like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then they throw it at me. Yeah, but you look great all year round. I'm like, yeah, but I don't look the same all year round.
Right.
I have extra body fat through a certain amount of months in a year, and I train completely different, eat completely different. And I also have been training over 20 years.
Right.
So my bad shape will be someone's great shape. And then when I get to like a stage ready lead, they're like, oh, okay, that's a difference.
That is a difference.
Last time I dieted, my hairdresser literally said, like, I can see the fission of the skull where your skull bones connect. Like I can
Yeah.
see every single line. So that's how lean I used to get. It's like, to me, it's probably like if you're more advanced, you might be a bit healthier than somebody who's just starting out and getting themselves ready for a show. Like Oksana Grishina, she just got pregnant with their first baby, and she's 5-time Miss Olympia winner and 10 times Miss Arnold Classic winner. So I think if she had tried that early in a stage, she probably wouldn't be able to. So
Probably not.
Bring it up from that. So what do you think people need to know when it comes to female physique development, and what do you see as the most how can I even describe it? The most obvious health issues that females have when they come to you? Is there anything that you can tell them from your experience that we're going to probably have to deal with this? Let's say your strength levels need to go up, or your muscle needs to be your priority now, or something like that. Is there a common denominator that you're always kind of looking forward as the number one step that they need to develop before they start sculpting their body into what they actually want to look like? Just for me personally, it always was, you need to get bigger. Like, I'm sorry, but you need to get bigger. Can we get psychologically over the fact that you need to grow a little bit before we strip anything down? Because if we do it now, it's just gonna be a disaster. So what is there's such things that you feel like is number one priority to focus on for somebody who's just starting out to get healthier, fitter, more aesthetically pleasing in their eyes?
It's not something I look for because I don't want to see it, but it's something that I see almost every time. And that's they're prioritizing their training by it seems common that they're starting to strength train now, but their thoughts of what strength training is just not strength training. They're going in, they're, you know, their coach, that's a whole other topic. Their coach is probably giving them some sort of plan that says, you know, do, you know, 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 12, or whatever it is. And these women are being taught to go in and lift the weight, you know, 12 times, 15 times, whatever it is. But they're not giving any instructions on what that really should be looking like. And so they're not lifting weights that are causing to fail at the 12th rep. They're just stopping because it says lift 3 sets of 12. So essentially what's happening is they're not really strength training. They're just lifting weights. And that's a big difference. If they're not giving the body the stimulus, the body's not going to adapt and create the new environment that we need. And at the same time, what they're notoriously doing is under eating. Now, this is my experience. I mean, if I have an overweight Gen Pop person, typically they're not overeating, or they haven't been overeating. But when I'm getting the aspiring fitness people, that's what's going on. Their strength training is not really strength training how I would define it. And their calorie intake is not sufficient to even fuel or support what's trying to happen. And so what happens usually is they all need to, like you say, they need to grow a little bit more before there's even any point of stripping them down, because they've already come in, you know, half full. You know what I'm saying? Like, instead of a full tank of gas, they've come in with half a tank and looking to run the race. And I think we need to, and what I always do if this is the case, which is so often, is I spend a few months with the caloric intake, a theoretical caloric intake of what maintenance should look like, because we have to make sure that we're eating as many calories as we possibly can without, you know, accruing too much body fat, so we know what our baseline looks like. And it's usually, you know, body weight factors in here, but if you're 130, 140 pound female, you're going to be eating over 2,000 calories as maintenance, you know, on average. You know, obviously your job or whatever, your lifestyle does factor into some degree, and I calculate all this stuff. But in general, if you're 130, 140 pounds, you're usually in around that 2,000, 2,400 calorie intake for maintenance. But they come in eating 16, you know, and they're like, oh, I want to get
Sometimes
lean.
they
Like,
come in eating 800, right?
yeah.
So how do you overcome this calorie deficit obsession? Because people will say, well, but I'm not losing any body fat. What's happening? I'm always in calorie deficit. If you say I'm in calorie deficit, then I'm not losing anything, but then I'm not in calorie deficit. So how do you get around that?
I usually play the game kind of like a courtroom. Like, you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. You defend your case, and then I'm gonna crush yours. And it's gonna come down to the fact, like, you're measuring scale weight, and if you've got yourself in an extreme deficit for long enough periods of time, your scale weight is not going to move, because your body is under so much stress. A lot of factors are accumulating here, and it's not showing you the true indication of what's going on. I much more of a believer of measuring body composition, and I have yet to this day, in 20 plus years, seen a female not lose body fat when we're trying to lose body fat, given the caloric intake that I deem reasonable. And that's because I'm measuring body composition, not scale weight. And that's where they're almost always getting lost. They see the scale weight not moving, so they think that they're not losing. The body's not really on off binary. It's not like today I'm losing fat and tomorrow I'm not. It doesn't work that way. If you've been losing body fat and it all of a sudden stopped, it's because you're not looking close enough, or you don't have the technology to look close enough. But it didn't just stop. It's slowing down to the point where you need to make another measurement, or maybe a different style of metrics to track, because it can't just stop. If it was on off like that, you know, people would be falling dead all over the place on a daily. But it's not. It's an average over time. It always has been.
Yeah, I actually had somebody asking me a question. Aren't you eating too many calories? Because first of all, I don't really count calories. I don't care. I focus on food quality, but I'm over 6,000 calories every single day. And this person asked me, shouldn't you be eating no more than 150, 200 calories over your intake, unless you're trying to gain body fat? I'm like, I'm not being funny. Building tissue requires a lot of calories. like
Yeah,
a
it's
lot of
expensive.
calories. I work with strongmen. I work with guys who are 150, 160, 200 kilos body weight, and they eat 2,000 calories less than I do because they already there. I'm trying to push my weight up. Like I'm trying to build more tissue. So it's going to require a lot of calories, and I'm very active as well. So how do you go about when once you establish, okay, this is your calorie intake you need to be on to be healthy, to be fit, to do whatever the hell you need, and there will still be a pushback that I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. Do you usually find that once you do that, because they start training more intense, they actually start losing body weight and body fat really quick?
Every time. Every time I find that, and it's because of a few things. Their body is now getting what it needs, so their body can now process things the way it should, and things are running. The dials are all turned full blast. They feel better. They have more energy now. All of a sudden, they're training harder. Like it's like it has a synergistic effect. And the other thing is that normally people, as soon as they're at a theoretical maintenance caloric intake, the fact that they can train a little harder or a little longer or whatever, they put themselves in an energy deficit just by increasing their activity output without even realizing it. And we usually have to increase the calories even more. What I do with females 99% of the time is they come in, I do an assessment on them, I get an idea of their body composition. If they don't come in, I do it virtually. There's ways around not being in person, but we get an assessment done. I err on the side of caution because I know fat gain is the enemy. So I'll err on the side of caution. If I have to round the numbers, I'll round them a little bit down just so I know there's no possible chance of getting body fat. And then from there, every check-in, the measurements tell us whatever they tell us, we adjust accordingly, which is almost always, okay, we need to bump them a little more. We need to bump them a little more. And once the females start getting comfortable with their eating and not gaining body fat, it doesn't seemingly take too long for them to come along for the ride. And once they're okay with that, then they are unstoppable. They just go and they have no issues.
So when you go through the essentials for female physiology, like for female physique, what do you think is essential? Is it training that's the most important? Is it nutrition? Is it recovery? Is it hydration? Is there a pyramid of importance in your mind that gives the best results?
There probably is a pyramid, but I think the base of the pyramid is always going to be pretty similar for people. And I mean, it's goal dependent, obviously. But if the goal is like we're talking about aesthetics, then training does matter. But the overall energy balance is probably the most important thing.
Let's say the goal is to look great, be strong, have a lot of energy, and have a high quality of life for as long as possible. So I can still do some jumps, runs when I'm 70 years old. What would be your pyramid of importance?
The energy balance is the foundation. There has to be adequate energy, and then the goal specific would bring in what type of training, if any. If you want to be stronger, obviously there has to be some training involved, but the energy balance is the base. And then from there, excuse me, we pyramid up based on what they need. I think blood work is important. I think certain health parameters are important, but all those things are kind of chasing a tail if the energy balance is out of whack from the beginning. The body needs a certain amount of energy to make sure all the processes are running appropriately. And then from there, it becomes a little bit fine tuning. So I would say the number one thing is having the adequate energy intake to deal with whatever their lifestyle looks like. And that's seemingly the one that's always missed, the most important one.
So you would go energy intake, then you would go focus on training because, like you already noted, women would really benefit from training. Can you expand on that? Why is it so important for women to do resistance training? Because a lot of times we are too obsessed with just body weight. And we know for a fact that just that may cause more issues than actual benefits.
Well, the importance of strength training in females is going to come down to a lot of things. Like if we have an inadequate energy intake balance, so the base of our pyramid is fucked up, then we have the risk of irregular menstrual cycles. If we have irregular menstrual cycles, we start to mess around with hormones. We need hormones, endogenous hormone production, to be in the theoretical normal range for the reproductive years and all these things to help with longevity and the overall system, including things like bone mineral density, cardiovascular protective mechanisms, etc. If you start disrupting that, you start disrupting the hormones. If you start disrupting the menstrual cycle, you start disrupting the hormones, which you're needed for this stuff. Strength training helps keep bone mineral density in the later years in life. It also allows them to be able to increase their overall basal metabolic rate, how many calories they can be eating, because they have more lean tissue on their body. So I think the strength training has lots of factors. One of the things that they show in research is the loss of lean contractile tissue leads to all kinds of health issues down the road. Once the muscle quality is deteriorating, fat can infiltrate and almost like marbling on a steak. And once that happens, all kinds of health issues cascade from there. So trying to maintain lean muscle should be at everyone's priority list within reason. And then also because of the hormonal values from disrupting the amenorrhea and stuff like that, we don't want to risk bone mineral density loss or osteoporosis later in life, which is very common. It's more common to see, hip breaks in females than males as they get older. And it's usually because of that. You see females doing cardio and you see men lifting weights. It's the strength training that keeps the stimulus for that body to keep that bone strong, the adaptation for the bone to stay strong. So that stuff is very, very important long-term for sure.
So you would say energy intake number 1, training number 2.
Yeah.
What would be number 3 that you would focus on? Is it maybe, in my eyes, maybe metrics, maybe tracking what changes through years and whatnot?
I don't know if I would say training as number 2. I feel like a little bit of strength training should just be part of the energy balance. Like it should be a similar foundation.
So the way I look at it is when you say talk about resistance training and whatnot, I would not class it as training. Maybe my fault. Maybe if we class it as metabolic health, would that be number 2?
Yeah, sure. Yep. From there, though, I think it's going to come down to a little bit different for everybody. Like you have to look at the lifestyle. Like somebody that's has chronic stress and doesn't sleep, that's got to be a factor. Like we can't say we can't ignore that, because if they have that issue, their ability to strength train or to exercise in general is going to be sort of hindered. But I think that also falls back down to that baseline energy intake. If the energy balance is right and there's other problems, then we can start looking at blood work and health markers to see if something's going on. But if the energy intake is skewed from the beginning, it can cause a problem in all the other aspects, and it could be directly related or indirectly related, but it's going to be a culprit. So that has to start as the foundation. And I think, like I said, a little bit of exercises should be mandatory for everybody. But after that, I think the pyramid starts to become individual. I think sleep quality is important. Nutrition quality kind of ties in with the, caloric intake being accurate. It doesn't mean you eat all Kool-Aid or drink all Kool-Aid. You have to have a well-balanced meal. But after that, the basics, it's going to come down to the individual's goal and what they're trying to achieve. The lifestyle, to me, balance, work balance, personal balance, social, all these things, that's all kind of like the common sense stuff. If one of those things are off, sometimes you have to address them. But if we don't have the foundation laid out first, everything is going to be crumbling underneath.
So this brings me in asking you, where do you slot psychology into all this? Because we know that's probably the most important part that differs elite athlete to common folks. So, and for me personally, working with many people, the ones that are mentally the toughest on a training part, maybe not so tough outside of that, will get the best results in there, because obviously dealing with stress at home is completely different than dealing with something in gym. So where do you slot in mental training, mental preparedness, or however you want to name it? Do you ever deal with anything like that when you work with women? Do you ever tap into that, like, hey, by the way, how is everything at home? How is everything at work? Those kind of things. Do you have discussions like that?
Yeah, I have discussions like that all the time. Now, like the psychological part of that is not my field. I mean, it happens with every conversation I have with every client, but I don't claim to be, the expert in that. But what I do notice is there's two personalities. There's the ones that are going to go and do it, and the ones that you're going to have to push to go and do it.
Hmm.
And that's it. The A's and B's. I just find that how I communicate with them and how I adjust their training depends on if they're A or B. Usually, the A's, we have to sort of hold them back a little bit. They are the ones that are going to be trying to push harder or longer than they need. And that then factors into that energy balance again, and then the recovery aspect, which is relevant if they're training for performance, which usually the A's are. Where the B's, it's usually a little bit of the, not the opposite, but a little less extreme. And we usually need to encourage things to help them see the positive that they're seeing, because sometimes they're not going to be as meticulous with how they're tracking. So they'll see like, oh, I didn't eat this meal and my weight did this, or I did this and this happened. And then at that point, I explain to them why, from a physiological point of view, did that happen, just so they get a sense of relief that it's not game over. I mean, I don't want to excuse them being lazy, because sometimes they're not. Sometimes they have other priorities, and the gym takes the back step or whatever. I just want them to understand the consequences and why, and let them sort of determine what's the priority. But how to deal with the psychology of it, I don't know. I think it's like an individual basis. I communicate with them how I communicate with them. Sometimes I get through, sometimes I don't. They're the mystery, right?
So how would you kind of great insight, but how would you describe what people can expect from these series that are coming? This is kind of like an intro, just tapping into what you're going to kind of cover and whatnot, a little bit more about yourself. But give us maybe a broad outline of what people can expect from this series, and what they can learn by just watching this.
So in this series, the goal is to show people, females, how I set up everything, how I'm determining how much you're eating, how I determine what's your training look like, how am I determining what we need to do to succeed at whatever your goal is. We're going to be doing some case studies, and hopefully everyone can understand, okay, this is where seems to be more relevance of importance, and this is not as important. And it gives an idea, ideally, that where the focus needs to be put, where you can relax a little bit, and ideally you'll still see that progress will still happen. And the goal is to get what you want without sacrificing anything, ideally. I mean, there'll be some, obviously, but it's not about killing yourself or starving yourself or causing hormonal disruptions. We're trying to limit or eliminate those problems and just kind of coax the body along and help establish new habits that lead towards the goal long term.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to get this on roll. And if anyone got any questions or any comments or anything like that that they want to hear specifically from you, so they can leave some comments and whatnot, and then we're gonna make sure that we do an episode just on those topics. But I think this is a great start. So we're gonna probably go deeper into energy intake, more about training, metabolic health,
Yeah.
what kind of metrics to track, what's actually important in blood tests, in measurements, and all those kind of things, and maybe we'll tap into psychology a little bit as well, even though, that's not your
It's inevitable. Yeah, it's inevitable. And if somebody wants to put their own specific case study down, I'm happy to tackle it, as part of the series. I mean,
yeah,
why not?
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Right, Scott. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next video.
Yeah, man. All right, sounds good. Thanks.